Hello, guys, and welcome to Monday, March 23rd's lesson. Pre recording this one for you, but good to see all of you. I hope you're doing well. Again, I hope things for school are going all right. And if you had any questions about assignments, you could always just contact your teachers through email. It would be the best way to do that. So if you have any trouble with any of my classwork, anything like that, just email me and let me know. But otherwise, I hope things are going good for you in your self quarantine. So good to see all of you, and we'll get this thing started. So for today, over on Classroom, here's your directions. It says I'm going to be moving the live stream from Twitch to YouTube in the future. As of right now, YouTube hasn't okayed my live stream account to actually live stream. So instead of live streaming this one, I just decided I'd pre-record it and upload it as just a regular video. So I'm actually recording this. This is Sunday afternoon. It's 3:45, so that's when I'm doing this thing. But I'll post this thing later today for what you're supposed to do for tomorrow, March 23rd. So in the future, we're going to move to my YouTube channel rather than Twitch because people were blocked still. And Mr. Kerper and I couldn't figure out how to fix that. So to avoid that problem, we're just going to live stream it on YouTube. Hopefully that's a better alternative. Again, I'm looking into possibly using Zoom at some point, but as of right now, we're just going to stick with the streams because it's easier to get everyone from all my classes in all at once. The second thing that you're supposed to do for today is take the attached notes over a new unit on Vietnam. Yay, fun times. We're starting a new unit on Vietnam. This is probably my favorite unit to teach, so I'm pretty bummed out that we'll be doing this remotely rather than together in class, but it is my favorite unit. There are again speaker notes on the slides and some guided questions, so we'll jump right into this thing. Whoops, I actually already had it open. Let's close that tab. The Vietnam War is going to start in the 60s, but the build-up to this war had been going on for quite some time. For those of you that don't know, here's a map. Vietnam is located right here in Southeast Asia. It's a small country, but like a lot of countries in this part of the world, in just Asia, it's very densely populated. So there's a whole lot of people living in this otherwise kind of small country. Vietnam, this war in the 60s, is going to be another proxy war. Just like the Korean War, the Chinese will get involved and send some Chinese troops. However, unlike the Korean War, the Chinese will not be sending, as many troops. In this one, they're only going to be sending a couple 100,000, and the rest of the fighting would be done by Americans and Vietnamese. But it is still nonetheless a proxy war in which the Soviet Union and China would prop up the communists in Vietnam to fight against us, the United States, and our ally, the nationalist South Vietnam. More on that later, though. So here's where Vietnam's located. Here's a picture of some guys getting off a Huey aircraft here into Vietnam. You can see it's a densely forested area, and it's got there's a lot of jungle, and that's going to be problematic for soldiers fighting. We'll talk a whole lot about that as we go on. Is that very, very dense foliage in Vietnam. The war is going to start, and it immediately has some controversy, but it's a slow build. The U.S. doesn't get involved in this thing directly with American troops right off the bat. It's a slow build. We get in, we get involved, and the more and more troops we send over, the more involved we get, the more controversial this war becomes back on the home front. So although we would have a numbers advantage, the war had its costs. A lot of American soldiers would lose their life, and there was a big cry out in the United States against this war. So it was a controversial war. Second slide here. Looks like this text is too big. Let's fix that. Let's go with something like that. Maybe 30 would work. No, 30 is too big. Let's go to 24. So French Indochina is the name of what Vietnam was as a colony. It actually included, so France colonized this region in Southeast Asia in the 1880s, and it would also include neighboring countries like Laos, Cambodia, etc. So the The Vietnamese were living under French colonial rule. The French showed up in the 16 and 1700s mostly for trading in silks, but also to spread Catholicism to the region. So France was aggressively trying to colonize Vietnam. By 1880, they had done just that and colonized the region. They set up a colonial government with its capital up in Hanoi, and from there on out, they're trying to westernize Vietnam and treat it like they would any other French colony, which means that they want it to be Catholic like other French colonies. So they're aggressively trying to change what had been going on in Vietnam, which was self-rule. That's obviously controversial because many of the Vietnamese people didn't want to live under the rule of a bunch of foreign Frenchies. They weren't too keen on, the fact that France was restricting the rights of Buddhists to practice their religion and, forcing them to convert to Catholicism. That was controversial, and it wasn't it wasn't just gonna be a smooth colonization here for France. There would be several rebellions and independence movements that were trying to kick the French out. The most successful of these is going to be a communist one. So Ho Chi Minh, he's a Vietnamese man. He spends much of his young life and his life as a young adult traveling to the Soviet Union and China, where he studies at a university, learns about communism, and then later becomes a teacher of communism. So he's a big fan of communism. And he will indeed come back to his homeland, Vietnam, in the 1930s and form a communist party called the Communist Party of Vietnam. Very creative, I know. So this Communist Party is also going to want to kick the French out. It's an independence faction as well. So this is the group that would indeed eventually get Vietnam their independence, and that's going to hurt America's feelings because, they're communist. The United States supported French rule in Vietnam, not only because the French were suppressing these communists, but also because France was our ally in NATO. So it would make sense that we'd back up France and try and keep them in charge of what was called French Indochina. But alas, all the money and advisors and the things we send them don't help. Our first steps would be to send money to the French to fight against these communists here and maintain their control over Vietnam. Next, we'd send military advisors and equipment. And then finally, we'd send a small contingent of American troops to come help the French in what was called the French Indochina War in the 1940s and 50s. So the Viet Minh, as they were called, formed by Ho Chi Minh, was going to be a popular party and faction to join because they were the party of independence that was going to kick these imperialist Frenchies out of the region. So the first guided question for you is, why might Vietnamese people reject French culture, their language, their religion, etc.? Well, that's because France is completely foreign to them. France is all the way across the world. The Vietnamese people, prior to France showing up in the 1880s, had their own thing going. They have their own culture, their own language, and by and large were mostly Buddhists. They weren't Catholics, though. So yes, this big shift from what Vietnam was up to and kind of being forced into the, to fit in this box that was French culture, language, and religion. Yeah, a lot of Vietnamese people did reject that idea and felt that France was, a no-good imperialist over here ruining Vietnamese people's lives. Why would communism appeal to people living under an imperialist foreign ruler? Well, as a system, communism is going to make everyone equal, and that was certainly not the feeling for the Vietnamese colonists here. They didn't feel like they were treated with the same regard that a French citizen in France was treated. They were just, kind of a second-class citizen. So yeah, this idea of rising up and overthrowing the proletariat that Karl Marx talks about in the Communist Manifesto. There's also something there about them wanting to rise up and overthrow, not really the proletariat in this case, but a foreign leader and a foreign government. So there's a lot of appeal in there, both in the the economic aspect that everyone would be equal, and also in the sort of communist revolution factor that this party would be, pushing for independence and a revolution of their own. There's very few remnants of France's colonial government in Vietnam today. The communists do a pretty good job of, once they kick France out, they kind of whitewash the history, get rid of all the stuff, and there's a small segment of Catholics still in Vietnam, but for the most part, the only thing you're going to find that shows that France used to own Vietnam is French architecture, like this building here, the Municipal Theater in Saigon. So that's really the only legacy of France. If you go to Vietnam, people aren't going to be speaking French. You know, there again are some Catholics, but far, far less than when the French were there converting people. Ho Chi Minh is the communist leader in Vietnam. He studied in the Soviet Union. He studied in China. He was a teacher of communism in those two countries, and at different times in his life was kind of tasked by the Soviet Union to bring communism to Vietnam. He does this when he's about 40 years old. He sets up the Communist Party of Vietnam. He later forms the Viet Minh, which is two words. I'm going to fix that in my speaker notes. The Viet Minh is the communist army in Vietnam that would report to Ho Chi Minh. And by the time we're in full-blown war with Vietnam in the 60s, Ho Chi Minh is an old man. He's in his 70s, but he still maintained a public presence. He was very popular amongst the communists in Vietnam. And like most, communist dictators, he's going to do a lot to suppress the opposition. So if you didn't like him, well, you're probably, put on a list, possibly executed, or kicked out of the country. Like the Kim dynasty, as in like Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, Kim Park-sung, the communist dictators in Korea, Ho Chi Minh is still revered as like a cult hero in Vietnam. So if you just looked up, Ho Chi Minh statues, you can find, much like other communist leaders, there's kind of a cult of personality about this guy. There's statues everywhere, and he's still revered as the guy that got him their independence. So he's got a cult hero sort of status in Vietnam. The Viet Minh, or Ho Chi Minh's communist army, you may notice there's some young people in this army. There's also some women. That's because this was a guerrilla group. Not a gorilla like an animal, but guerrilla as in guerrilla warfare. Let's get you a definition here for that. Guerrilla warfare is a form of irregular warfare in which small groups of combatants, such as paramilitary personnel, armed civilians, or irregulars, use military tactics including ambushes, sabotage, raids, petty warfare, and hit-and-run tactics. Well, in the case of the Viet Minh, they would be armed civilians, so they're not trained soldiers, they're just everyday people that liked Ho Chi Minh, liked communism, and also really wanted to kick the French out. They join this army, they get a gun, and yeah, their tactic is going to be ambushes at night, hit-and-run tactics, things like that. Petty warfare, hiding and laying traps is going to be what the Viet Minh and later the Viet Cong are all about. Here's the flag that becomes associated with this group, and then later is now the flag of Vietnam. This is the flag of their country now. Here's some people, they look happy in this picture because, again, Ho Chi Minh promised that they could kick the French out and have a legitimate Vietnamese-ran Vietnam. So the Viet Minh are going to fight the French, and they are going to eventually win that war, and they would end up seizing North Vietnam, was where they were politically most active and had the most support. So yeah, a lot of the people you see in this army here are just everyday farmers that decided to pick up, put down the plow, so to speak, pick up a gun, and help fight for their country's independence. So they viewed, local Vietnamese viewed this army as a group of freedom fighters. Kind of like we'd look at the Founding Fathers or people who fought in the Revolutionary War. So those are the notes for today. Your third step for today would be to work on your research paper. It's still going to be due April 1st. I know that school's been pushed back even further, and again, this due date's going to be flexible, but for now I'm keeping it at April 1st. So email me your paper if you want to. I'll gladly look at it. If you had just a simple question, or you wanted me to look at something, you could attach the paper. I can go in and, drop you a comment, and that would probably be an easy way for you to get advice on your paper as you continue writing it. At this point, the April 1st due date is like a week and a half away, so you'd want to be getting towards, that last body paragraph or so, or you'd at least want to be halfway through this thing. So hopefully, if you're not there, don't panic. You still have time, and you can always reach out to me. Email me what you got, and I'm happy to drop you advice on where you could go next. So don't just be stuck and stay stuck. Reach out for help, and it's not going to bother me at all. So I'm happy to help you. That is literally my job. So just feel free to email me if you have questions about your paper or any other matter. I think that really just about does it for today. So again, we'll be switching to a live stream at some point, possibly this week. So I'll keep you guys posted on what's going on there. So I'll let you guys know. Basically each day, like I have been, I'll make a post that details what I'd like you to do for the day, and whether or not there's a stream, because I don't anticipate needing to stream every day. But days like today where there's a couple slides of notes and it's start of the week, I feel like it's a good idea for me to go in and just kind of lay out what I've got in Classroom for you. So that's all I got for today. Peace out. Have a good rest of your Monday.